If you're ever looking for a lesson in how not to do crisis comms, MasterChef's Gregg Wallace this weekend provided a masterclass.
Now, I've been doing MasterChef for 20 years. Amateur, celebrity and professional MasterChef. And I think in that time, I have worked with over 4,000 contestants of all different ages, all different backgrounds, all walks of life. And apparently now, I'm reading in the paper, there's been 13 complaints in that time. Now, in the newspaper, I can see the complaints coming from a handful of middle class women of a certain age just from Celebrity MasterChef. This isn't right.
So Gregg Wallace's implicit attack on middle-class women of a certain age was in response to allegations that he has consistently made inappropriate comments on set of a sexual nature. The first public allegation was made last week by the BBC's Kirsty Walk, who starred on Celebrity MasterChef in 2011.
The first time that I suppose we were subjected to a kind of sexually inappropriate story was it was very early morning, and we were in a retirement home, and the crew was in a room with the contestants, John Road, and we were getting ready. We'd each been given a recipe that one of the residents was a favourite baking recipe, and that we were going to do our best to bake for them, and then they were going to come, and they were going to come to the kitchen, and they were going to judge it. And Gregg Wallace came in and launched into a soliloquy, essentially a story of a sort of sexually inappropriate nature about his, well, now former wife. And I was really shocked. I thought, what is this about? You know, I was angry because I thought, this is just not on.
Other celebrities to have come forward about Wallace include radio host Asma Mir, who was allegedly asked by Wallace to pass a sexual and demeaning remark to a media executive of her acquaintance, Ulrika Johnson, who told The Telegraph that a fellow contestant on Celebrity MasterChef walked off set after Wallace told a rape joke, and Kirsty Allsop, who told Channel 4 that Wallace made inappropriate comments in front of her, and then went on to say this about Wallace's comments about middle-class women of a certain age.
For a start, I think the narrative is that it's women who are too sort of unsexy, too old to get his jokes. I think it's a narrative of oh no, that you're speaking out because you just don't get it. You're too old. You're all dried up old hags. That's what I feel that he's saying. But I think that the reason, if it is true, and I don't think it's true, I think that a lot of women have come out who are not middle-class women of a certain age. That's what I've been given to understand. But if it were true, let's say, Kath, it were true, those are the women with the power. Those are the women who should be speaking out.
Now, Kirsty Allsop seems to be correct when she says complaints aren't just coming from middle-aged women of a certain age. The Telegraph say they have spoken to 20 staff members on MasterChef who made allegations. The Telegraph write this. The Telegraph approached a former staff member who claims that she was asked to clean a stain off Wallace's trousers, at which point he mimicked a sex act. She says that in front of other production staff, he held the back of her head and thrust his body towards her. She was young at the time and found the incident distressing. The woman subsequently decided to make a formal complaint to the BBC about the alleged incident, which took place over a decade ago. The Telegraph has also spoken to one of the people who is said to have witnessed Wallace's behaviour and understands they have also spoken to the BBC. It was not the only allegedly lewd conduct detailed in the complaint that the BBC received from the woman. In her letter to the broadcaster, she also claimed that Wallace had walked into the MasterChef studio completely naked except for a sock pulled over his penis before doing a silly dance, an incident which she claimed left staff hugely unsettled and which she looks back on as incredibly inappropriate. She also alleged Wallace was very touchy-feely and made disgusting sex-related jokes. Ash, I mean, Gregg Wallace is very famous, fairly charismatic on MasterChef, so you can see why this is a big news story. What do you make of this? What do you make of this story?
Sorry, I'm still stuck on penis sock. Like, I'm still having an emotional reaction to that. This stuff is rife in the media, and even someone like me who like is fairly powerful in that I don't rely on any one um establishment media outlet for my income. I have a home here, it's Novara. Even I have to make decisions about how to um manage the behavior of sexually inappropriate men because they've been with these organizations for a really long time, because they've got public facing presenting roles, and because I feel that the easier thing to do is to get rid of the person with no contract rather than the person on a staff contract. I mean, there's someone who fairly senior and powerful at a particular media corporation, where in the like height of summer, when it was like approaching 40 degrees, this was a couple of years ago, just like would always make comments if I was wearing shorts, and it didn't matter how long my shorts were, would always refer to them as hot pants, and would get like kind of excited about it. And so now it's like, well, do I want to give up this job? Do I want to give up this platform to like advance, a set of politics that I believe in? No. So the call I made is that I'm just not going to wear shorts in front of him ever again. And it feels gross to have to make that kind of compromise. So I I know that there'll be some people that say, well, intention really matters here. Like, he's setting out to make women uncomfortable. I think that the really important thing here is that if you don't have a relationship with somebody where you've got a sense of where their actual humor is, not just the laugh that they do to go along with you to not make things uncomfortable, where their humor actually is. I don't want in those kinds of scenarios to make everyone kind of just regurgitate HR when they're talking together. People make bawdy jokes, that's fine. But when it tips over into, I guess, the explicit, when and I guess it's like, think of it as like EQ levels, right? There's like explicitness, like the degree of like affection and familiarity that you already have, like how well do you know each other, who are the other people in the room, like all these things matter when you're taking into account whether something like this is beyond the pale or not. So that's the first thing I want to say. The second thing that I want to say is that, weirdly, I can also understand this from Gregg Wallace's point of view. And how I imagine it goes is this. By the way, not the middle class women of a certain age thing, because that's just finding a reason to blame women for being uncomfortable rather than looking at your own behavior. But where I can understand why he might feel quite wronged, and this is just my opinion, this is just speculation, is that he's probably gone through decades of working with the BBC now, where he's like, well, everyone was always laughing at me. Like, everyone thought it was fine. And I kept getting this, contract renewed again and again and again. And I was their star, and they seemed to love me, right? They would, tell me how great the show is. And they seemed to love me, like when the cameras were rolling, when the cameras weren't rolling. Where's all this come from? I get that. Like, I get being like genuinely kind of confused by it. And the other thing, which I imagine is playing into this, and we saw this with Jermaine Genius, is that after the Hugh Edwards scandal, where a former BBC, kind of flagship host, was convicted of a criminal offence, in this case, possession of child sexual abuse imagery. The BBC's gone into full arse covering mode, so it's sort of doing this like, big like trawling of the net, and what's getting caught in it are men who have behaved inappropriately and behaved in ways which are wrong, but certainly haven't done the kind of thing that Hugh Edwards did or Jimmy Savile did, and probably feel a bit like, hang on, I'm being turned into a bit of a scapegoat here. And I can imagine feeling quite hard done by that. So I think you've got to like look at all of these issues a bit separately. Like, one is it right for Gregg Wallace to allegedly have behaved that way? If all these things are true, I'd say no, obviously not. The second thing to consider is, I can imagine that for Gregg Wallace, it's been, nothing has been said to him directly until now. Perhaps it could have gone that way. And then you've got this latter element, which is, the BBC sort of trying to compensate for these two massive sexual That's not sexual harassment or sexual impropriety. We're talking about one of the most prolific child abusers in British history, and a very high-profile newsreader convicted of possession of child sexual abuse imagery. These are really, really serious things, and it just feels like now what the BBC is catching in its net is like, well, not right. Doesn't approach that degree of seriousness, and certainly doesn't make up for the institutional failures when it came to the case of Jimmy Savile.